The group trends decrease as you move down. So as you go down the column, it gets smaller. The reason why is the same as electronegativity. The period trends as you go from left to right increases. Again, the reason is the same as electronegativity. Yeah, we're going to talk about how it's going to show up on the quiz and that sort of thing.
Oh.
Is that what we're doing? We're just going outside.
Trying to hit me, JC.
It's like extra recent.
Trying to hit me with the ruler.
Are they gonna have like a pumpkin patch and photo booth? Oh yeah. What is it? What is fall fun? I can't wait for our picture. Outside.
Sorry.
It's freezing. What they do? I hate this kid. The other boy said yes. I didn't even know it was happening. I didn't get to. Yeah, that's just so good. It says that I can free dress, but did I? No.
If I must be honest, I just used my free dress ticket so I didn't have to wear a uniform shirt.
That's fair.
Make sure I stay off the road.
I didn't. I just want my jacket that shows I am smart. Me personally, I wouldn't like that.
No, and I returned the favor. I returned the favor. It's established. Why are you treating me like this?
All's fair in love and war, Tanya. Of course you're
All's
great.
fair in love and war right now. I'm kidding. I like Tiny.
Yeah, I look kind of.
Supposed to be an I do love Tiny. I love these little Claire's earrings. Sister ball. This is Marjorie Gibson free, and she got her second piercing. And her third piercing. Reopened.
All right, we got it?
So yeah, so that's basically what happened. Ready guys?
No, Jahar. No, Jahar.
He doesn't like
No, Jahar.
It feels like Friday, but it's actually Wednesday. So excited. That means we have more time in the week. More time to learn. More time to prosper.
Only one day. No, Friday.
Yes, I know.
For what reason?
Where did you go?
And you will.
We're not Tuesday. We're not off Tuesday.
What you looking at? I saw you keep looking. What you looking at?
But not Tuesday. You didn't even use it.
Oh my
Yeah,
God,
so I didn't even ask that question.
Because he did this.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're ready? So, from this, guys, I need everybody's attention. So, what we need to know from the quiz, or for the quiz, make sure you know the definition of an ion, ionization energy, electronegativity. So, an ion, remember, is an atom with an unequal number of electrons or protons, or it could be listed as an atom with a charge. All right. Ionization energy is the energy needed to remove an electron. Electronegativity is the energy needed to, or the energy, or how hard an atom holds on to its electron. or the tendency for it to attract electrons. All right? So make sure you know those. All right? The other three things you need to know, pretty much, is if you go from left to right across the periodic table, the atomic radius or the size of the atom does what? Decreases. You go from top to bottom in a column, the atomic radius does what? Increases. So it gets larger.
You said the atomic number?
Atomic radius.
Oh, what?
From left to right, the ionization energy of the atoms do what?
Go higher.
Get higher. From top to bottom, they
Get lower.
get lower. From left to right, electronegativity gets
Higher.
higher. Top to bottom, electronegativity gets lower. So that's the main thing you need to know for the quiz.
Is there a difference between saying lower and decreasing?
So, if I were to give you, let's say, lithium, nitrogen, and fluorine, and ask you which one of those atoms is larger,
Lithium.
it would be what?
Lithium. Because it's
Lithium,
to the left.
nitrogen, and fluorine.
Lithium.
It would be lithium.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if you go from left to right,
It gets smaller.
they get the size of the radius gets smaller.
Right.
Right? Remember, left to right, the radius gets smaller. The other two are the opposite. So if I gave you what? Ionization energy and electronegativity. They get larger as you go from left to right.
So what are we talking about right now?
So if I were to give you lithium, nitrogen, and fluorine, and ask you which one of those atoms is larger, it would be lithium because it's the one furthest to the left.
That's for electrons.
That's for radius.
Okay, you said it would be, lithium would be the smallest,
No, it's lower.
The largest.
the largest.
Okay, if I ask you for size of the atom,
Size, it would be the largest.
the largest.
Yeah.
All right. Now, if I gave you lithium, nitrogen, and fluorine, and asked you which one of those elements would have a tendency to hold on to its electrons the strongest,
Then I'll be flowing.
that would be fluorine. Because remember, the tendency for an atom to attract or hold on to its electrons is electronegativity, right? So as you go from left to right across the periodic table, electronegativity gets larger or increases.
Same with the ion.
Same with the ionization.
Okay, that makes sense.
So basically, if you can remember radius,
You can remember.
from left to right, atoms get smaller. Top to bottom, the size of the atom gets larger. The other two, ionization energy and electronegativity, are the exact opposite. From left to right, they increase. Top to bottom, they decrease. Alright, so let's say I gave you lithium, potassium, and cesium.
Wait, lithium.
Li, so lithium, potassium, and cesium. And asked you which one of those three atoms is the smallest.
Lithium.
Lithium, because it's the one
Higher.
furthest up. Right? If I gave you lithium, potassium, and cesium, and asked you which one of those would it be the easiest to take an electron from?
Cesium.
Cesium, right? Because if you're taking electrons, that is ionization energy, right? So the one with the lowest ionization energy would be the one furthest down. That would be the one it would be easiest to remove its electron. The lower the ionization energy, the easier to remove the electron.
Okay, I got a question.
Yes, ma'am.
So, like you said, it was the opposite. So the atomic radius going left to right, it decreases, and the ionization energy left to right, it increases. Okay.
All
I'm
right.
observing some fat phobia.
Let's say I gave you lithium, calcium, fluorine, and Te. So Li, Ca, Te, and F. And asked you which one of those atoms is the largest.
Whatever one is on that side.
Calcium.
calcium, yeah, whatever one on that.
Wait,
How? It's in
wait, what was
two-
the third
So
one?
if I gave you Li, Ca,
Oh, Li.
F, and Te,
Oh yeah,
Ella.
and asked you which one is the largest,
Li.
it would be Te.
I thought,
Oh,
the
'cause it's
first group has the
All right,
largest.
so notice they weren't all in the same row or column, right?
Yeah.
The trend up and down, the increase and decrease up and down is larger than the increase and decrease left to right. So if they're not all in the same column or row, look for the one that is the furthest to the bottom, and that would be the largest. The smallest would have been the one that was furthest up and to the right, which would have been Li in this case.
So on the test, you would, so you like,
It's okay.
you would actually
It was a trick question.
get a rating.
I will give you a couple of, ask you radius or size. That's the same thing. Would be larger or smaller, and give you 3 or 4 choices, and you have to pick the one that would be the largest or the smallest.
So you would just ask which one is the largest or the smallest, and we don't know which one.
No, I would give you choices to pick from.
No, I'm talking about like
Denominator.
radius or,
Okay, if I say larger or smaller, it'll probably have size in front of it. That would be radius.
okay.
Ionization energy and electronegativity, I could ask them 2 ways. One of them, I could just say which one has the highest or lowest electronegativity, or highest or lowest ionization. The other way is I could use their definition instead of the word. So like if I asked you, if I gave you lithium, potassium, and cesium, and asked you which one of those would be least likely to give up an electron,
Lithium.
it would be lithium. Alright? Remember, if you're giving up an electron, or have an electron taken from it, that means you would that's your ionization, right? So the least likely one to have an electron taken from it would have the would have the highest electronegativity or ionization. And remember, as you go down, ionization energy and electronegativity. That makes sense? Alright, so those I could either ask you with just with a word, ionization energy or electronegativity, or I could ask you with the definition. I think on the quiz I use more the word. On the test, it's probably more the definition.
Will they always be in the same group when you ask which one is more likely to lose?
Not necessarily.
So if you was to have
So if they're not all in the same row or column, use the column trend. Because the column trend is going to be greater than any difference left and right. So the difference up and down is going to be greater than the difference left and right. So then you just look for whichever, if they're not all in the same row or column, you look for the one that's furthest down or furthest up. Unless 2 of them, the furthest up or furthest down, and 2 of them in the same row or something, then you use the row.
Can you give an example of that? Because I'm not following.
That was like if I gave you Li, calcium, Te, and F,
So it would be T.
and asked you which one of those was the largest atom. Since it's the largest atom, that's size, right?
Right.
So as I go from top to bottom, size increases. So that means Te is the one furthest down the periodic table. So it's going to be the largest.
Got you.
Does that make sense?
That means it's more likely to lose electrons?
Since it's further down, it would be more likely to lose electrons
Got you.
because its ionization energy and electronegativity are lower because that decreases as you go down. All right. So any with that? I have some for you to practice on that you can look at and kind of practice. All right. The other thing you need to know for the test come from ions. So what is an ion?
A charged atom.
So it's an atom with you can either see the definition as an atom with a charge or an atom with an unequal number of protons and electrons, because that's what causes the charge, all right? Then you need to know a cation loses electrons, it has a positive charge, and it's formed by metals, all right?
This is for the yeah.
This is for the quiz.
Okay.
So know that a cation loses electrons, has a positive charge, and formed by metals. An anion has a negative charge, gains electrons, and it's formed by nonmetals. Right? And then the last thing you need to know, cations are smaller than the original or the neutral atom. Anions are larger than the neutral atom. All right? So cations are smaller, anions are larger.
Okay, so the stuff
And
on the
cations are positive and
Positive.
loses,
Positive, they lose electrons, and they're formed by
and
metals.
then metals, and the other one, negative gains and formed by non-metals.
Correct.
Okay, so everything that's on the little practice worksheet, that's on the quiz or the test?
I think
Because we have
it's
to.
too much
Good
money.
quiz.
Like,
All right,
It's 10
so now,
questions.
what?
It's 10 questions.
It's 10 questions.
I was like,
The last thing that could be on the quiz that's not necessarily on the practice worksheet is, let's say I were to give you these 4 choices. Sodium, potassium, sodium ion, and potassium ion. All right, so those are your 4 choices. Sodium, potassium, sodium ion, and potassium ion. And I ask you, which one of those particles is the smallest?
The
Sodium
ion.
ion.
Okay,
ion.
okay, why would the ion be the smallest?
Potassium ion.
Sodium ion.
Because as you go down, it decreases.
As you go down, it gets bigger.
But why would it be the ion and not the neutral atom?
Because the neutral atom is a large.
Okay, you're right.
Because of the charge.
But, so, let's think about this. Sodium and potassium, are they metals or nonmetals?
Metals.
They're metals. So that means they form cations or anions?
Anion.
Cations, right?
Yes.
So metals form cations. So we know cations are
Smaller.
smaller than the neutral atom. So that tells me that if I'm asking you for the smallest particle, since they're metals, one of the ions is going to be my answer. So now to figure out which ion, we look at size. So remember, as you go down the column,
It increases.
the size of the atom gets
Bigger.
larger, right?
Yeah.
So that means sodium would be a smaller atom than potassium. So if sodium starts out as a smaller atom, when it forms its ion, that means it's going to be even smaller, right? So the smaller atom is going to produce the smallest ion. That makes sense? So sodium ion would be the answer. All right. That makes sense? Kind of, sort of?
Kind of, sort of.
I don't make sense at all.
I'll get it, but I got lost.
Okay, what if it was what if it was a non-metal?
What?
I thought ions and
Ionization. Okay, ionization energy and electronegativity go down. Yes. Ions are not the same thing as ionization energy. An ion is an atom that's either gained electrons or lost electrons. So you don't have the same number of electrons and protons. All right. So we know that metals lose electrons, so they form cations. Cations are going to lose electrons. They're going to have a positive charge. They're formed by metals, and they're smaller than their original atom. Anions gain electrons. They have a negative charge. They're formed by nonmetals, and they're going to be larger than the neutral atom. So if I gave you sodium and potassium, sodium ion and potassium ion, and asked you which particle is the smallest, all right? So we're dealing with size there, right? So I have to look at, first of all, sodium and potassium. Are they metals or are they nonmetals?
No.
They're metals. So since they're metals, that means they're going to form cations or anions?
Cation.
Cations. So now cations, are they smaller or larger than the neutral atom? Smaller. So that tells me that the ions then, one of the ions is going to be the answer. because I know they're smaller than the neutral atom. To figure out which ion is going to be smaller, you just look at the neutral atoms. So is sodium or potassium a smaller atom? Sodium. So since sodium's the smallest atom, that means its ion's going to be even smaller, so it would be the smallest particle. That makes sense?
So if it was fluorine and chlorine would be smaller, right?
So if I gave you fluorine, chlorine, fluorine ion, and chlorine
It
ion,
would have been
and asked you which one would be the smallest particle,
Chlorine.
yes, it would be fluorine. Right? Because those are what? Metals or non-metals?
non-metals. That's why I thought
Non-metals. So non-metals,
Or get bigger.
the ions are larger than the neutral atom, right? So that means the regular atom, the non-ion, is going to be the either larger, the answer. So then we just look at which one's bigger, fluorine or chlorine. Or which one's smaller in this case? Fluorine, so that means fluorine would be the smallest particle. That makes sense? If I gave you those four choices, fluorine, fluorine ion, chlorine